So I'm going to briefly review some of what I told you last time, and then I'm going to walk through, as I mentioned, I'm going to walk through the Disney film Pinocchio, and which I presume most of you have seen. How many of you have seen it? Yeah, okay, well that's so as I think I mentioned, that's something in and of itself, right? I mean, the fact that you've all seen it means that it's a production of cultural significance, and because it's such a strange artifact, that's one way of looking at it, it might be worth trying to take it apart to understand why it is, for example, that you even understand it. And so I offered you the proposition last week that we view the world essentially through a narrative lens, and I believe that we view the world through a narrative lens because the fundamental problem that we have to solve as living creatures is how we should act in the world. And that means how we should act to maintain ourselves, but also how we need to act in relationship to other people and in relationship to the broader world in order to maintain ourselves across time. So that's a complicated problem, right? It's not just how you survive, it's how you survive now and next week and next month and next year and 50 years from now, and maybe your descendants as well, if the culture is going to stabilize, and then not only you across all those time frames, but you and everyone else across all those time frames. It's a viciously difficult problem. And so I would say that we have evolved mechanisms to solve that. I think that's self-evident in some sense because, for example, one of the mechanisms that animals have evolved to deal with the problem of social being, even if they're not particularly social animals, is the dominance hierarchy, right? Or you could call it a hierarchy of authority or power, because I think considering human structures, social structures, as mere power structures is a terrible mistake. It's a terrible oversimplification, because power is by no means the only, like force is what I mean. Force is not a stable way of solving the problem of how to live together across time. The question is, what is the stable way of solving how to live together across time? And that really is the question, and it's part of the question that I'm trying to answer, partly because it's a perennial problem, right? We face the problem of how to organize ourselves in small social units without undue conflict, and then we face the larger problem of how to organize ourselves into large social units without undue conflict, and that conflict can be absolutely devastating and frequently is. So then I would also say that the first way of solving this problem isn't conscious, you see, not at all. And you know, you may know and you may not know that there are different forms of memory, right? Really technically different forms of memory. So for example, there's short-term working memory, which is the memory that you use to hold things like telephone numbers in your active imagination. It decays very rapidly. It's only about 4 to 7 bits, which is why, well, it's why phone numbers were at least 7 digits long. You know, you can kind of manage that as a loop. And then there's episodic memory, and that has two elements. One is semantic and the other is episodic. It's what's the name of that? Someone said something? Yes, well, there's procedural memory, and then there's another, the kind of memory that you use to represent your experiences to yourself. So let's say it's image laden, and the other one is semantic, and semantic is your memory for facts, and those are quite different. So for example, procedural memory, that's how you ride a bike, that's how you play the piano, that's how you play jazz music if you're in a combo. It's the memory, it's a funny kind of memory because it's actually built right into you, you know. I mean, so is the kind of memory that you use to represent your own life, but it's much more malleable in some sense. So what that means is that in your procedures there is information that you don't know about. It's patterned information that you don't know about. Part of that is how to act. You know, like when you walk into a social gathering, you don't really think through how you're going to act. You know how to act. And if someone asked you, exactly what it is that you're doing and why. You could formulate a story about it, but the probability that it's the existence of that story that enabled you to act that way is zero, because you have to react way faster than that. And so, you know, you have social knowledge built into your nervous system because you've practiced being a social being for a very long period of time. And of course then that social being has been shaped for forever, really, and it's the right way of thinking about it. You know, we know that animals organize themselves into hierarchies, and we'll say of dominance because it's more true the farther back you go in time, at least since the time of the crustaceans, you know, when we split from our common ancestor 300 million years ago. And it's true for social animals and non-social animals. So even animals that don't live together in groups have to organize themselves into a hierarchy in the space they inhabit. Songbirds are a good example, and they have dominance disputes all the time. Partly that's, you can hear them having their little dominance disputes in the spring when they're singing, because basically what they're singing is, I'm pretty damn healthy and I'm ready to go, and if you're another bird like me, you better steer clear of this tree. And the dominant songbirds, you know, they don't live together. Crows are social, but most songbirds aren't. The dominant songbirds get the best nest, and the best nest is the one that doesn't get rained on, and it's not too windy, and it's close to food sources, and you know, and so then they have the healthiest chicks, and they attract the best mates. And like, it's really important where you're positioned in the hierarchy, even if you're not like a flock or herd creature. Now we're more like herd creatures, so it's even more relevant to us. But there's just no escaping a hierarchical arrangement in social being. That is social being, and it's evolutionarily ancient beyond conception. So 300 million years ago there weren't trees, you know, I mean, so the dominance hierarchy is older than trees.